The pool was everything she'd imagined it would be. Madison Hayes floated on her back in the deep end, eyes closed, arms spread wide like she was being crucified by comfort. The water was exactly 84 degrees. She could tell because the estate's smart system had announced it when she'd first arrived. The sun was warm on her face, the valley stretched out endlessly in every direction, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt like she could breathe without counting the cost. The house belonged to Marcus Chen. She knew this because she'd memorized everything about Marcus Chen over the past 7 months. 42 years old, divorced twice, made his fortune in cryptocurrency back when everyone said it was a joke, sold to Ethereum at exactly the right moment, timing that most people would call luck but that Madison recognized as calculated predatory instinct. He owned 3 properties, this one in the Malibu Hills, an apartment in West Hollywood where he rarely stayed, and a vacation compound in Aspen that sat empty 11 months of the year. The Malibu house was his favorite. He came here precisely every 3rd weekend, always alone, always on Friday nights. He stayed through Sunday evening, left by 8 p.m. without fail. He had a routine as precise as a German train schedule, and Madison had been tracking it for 3 months. Today was Wednesday. She had the house to herself until Friday at 6 p.m., which gave her exactly 37 hours. Madison opened one eye, scanning the property, 7,000 square feet of floor-to-ceiling glass and Calicut marble, a kitchen that looked like it had never seen actual food, a primary bedroom with a bathtub you could swim in, a home theater, a sauna, 2 wine cellars, and this pool, the crown jewel, set on a platform that seemed to float above the very sky itself. She dove under the water, swimming the length of the pool in powerful practice strokes. Her body felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The pool was heated, the tiles were heated, the air itself seemed heated. There was no cold here, no struggle, no crying children in the apartment next door, no eviction notices, no calls from the hospital about her mother's medical bills. Here there was only blue silence and the promise that this was possible, that a life like this could exist, that someone somewhere had constructed a world where comfort wasn't a luxury, it was an assumption. When she surfaced, she made her way to the shallow end and climbed out, water streaming off her skin. She'd brought her own towel, a small, delicate mercy to herself. She didn't want to use his towels, leave traces of herself in his bathroom. That felt too intimate, too criminal. The criminality part she'd made peace with weeks ago. Breaking into a house was actually surprisingly easy, it turned out, especially a house owned by someone rich enough to outsource all the actual maintenance. Marcus's security system was state-of-the-art, cameras, motion sensors, the whole arsenal, but it was also completely predictable. The gates opened when you entered the right code. And the code, apparently, was a password that Marcus had used for his gym, his email, and his banking app. Layla Forever 88, Layla being his first ex-wife. 88 presumably some significant year. Madison had found it on an old Instagram post. People were careless with their vulnerability when they thought no one was looking. She settled into one of the lounge chairs, Italian designer, probably $4,000, and let the sun dry her skin. In her bag, sitting under a table on the far side of the deck, was a sandwich she'd made at home, a paperback thriller she'd gotten from the library, and her phone. The phone was in airplane mode. She wasn't stupid enough to leave any digital trace of her presence here. What she was doing was called trespassing. It was also called burglary, technically, even though she hadn't taken anything. The law was strange that way. Intent mattered less than proximity. Being somewhere you didn't have permission to be, that was enough. She'd started small 3 months ago. The first time, she just stood in his driveway, looking at the house like it was a shrine. The second time, she'd touched the glass doors. The third time, using the code she'd just discovered, she'd actually gone inside. The first visit inside had nearly broken her. She'd stood in his kitchen, his actual kitchen, and wept while touching his refrigerator. She'd gone to his primary bedroom and sat on his bed, which cost more money than she'd made in the past 2 years combined. She'd opened his closet and run her fingers over the fabric of his clothes. Cashmere, silk, Italian leather, the texture of money. She hadn't taken anything that first time. She just absorbed it through her skin like it might transfer to her, like proximity to wealth was contagious. The second visit, she'd showered in his marble bathroom. She'd used his high-end shampoo that came in a bottle the size of her fist. She'd dried her hair with a towel so plush it felt like clouds. By the fourth visit, she'd grown bold enough to make a full meal in his kitchen. She'd eaten his expensive olive oil, his organic cheese, his grass-fed beef. She'd stood at his island and eaten food that cost more than her daily grocery budget, and she hadn't felt guilty, not even a little. By this week, she was swimming in his pool like she owned it. The sun climbed higher. Madison had brought sunscreen, SPF 70, the expensive kind, and she applied it methodically to her shoulders, her chest, her face. She couldn't afford to sunburn. Sunburns left evidence. Around 2 in the afternoon, she went back inside. The kitchen was glossy and silent. She made herself more food, some kind of prepared salmon from his freezer that was labeled with the date and a name. From Nabu. She ate it slowly, standing at the counter, looking out at the pool. Her phone, still in airplane mode, read 2:47 p.m. She had no one to call anyway. Her mother was in a care facility. Her sister didn't speak to her anymore. That had ended when Madison had asked to borrow $5,000 for the deposit on a better apartment, and her sister had said no without explanation. Her few friends from college had filtered away gradually as her life contracted into something smaller, sadder, less interesting. Marcus had people. She'd seen them in his Instagram. Beautiful women at parties, men in business casual at rooftop bars, a golden retriever that appeared in several photos looking supremely content. He had a life that involved other people, crowds, the assumption that he would always belong wherever he was. Madison had the opposite. She was the kind of person who, when she walked into a room, caused the energy to shift downward slightly. She wasn't ugly, exactly. She was just unremarkable in a way that made her easy to forget. Forgettable was sometimes its own form of loneliness. She cleaned up after herself, she always did, and made her way back to the pool as the afternoon deepened. The water was her sanctuary. In the water, she was weightless. Gravity had no claim on her. The world's hierarchy dissolved. It was 4:15 p.m. when she heard the sound. At first, it was just a distant hum, a car engine on the road below. Madison's body went immediately rigid. Her heart began its panicked rhythm. No, it couldn't be. The sound grew louder, coming up the hill, coming toward the property. Madison scrambled out of the pool, her hands shaking. She grabbed her towel, her shoes, the small bag with her few belongings. The car sound was definite now, unmistakable. A vehicle was turning into the driveway. It was Wednesday. He never came on Wednesday. Madison ran barefoot across the marble deck, leaving wet footprints that would dry in minutes. She had to move faster. She had to think. The front door was too exposed. The side gate. There was a side gate that led down to the lower terrace. If she could just get out, get away, she could disappear into the landscaping, down the hillside, back to her car, which was parked 2 blocks away on a public street. She was moving so fast that she didn't see him until he was already on the upper deck. He appeared as if materializing from the light itself, a tall man in an expensive suit, carrying a small leather duffel bag. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples. His face was the face she'd only seen in profile pictures and on the house's security footage. For a moment, they both froze. Madison was dripping wet, barefoot, holding a towel and her small bag of contraband. She looked exactly like what she was, a trespasser caught in the act. Marcus Chen's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something darker, a cold, analytical look, as if he was recalibrating his understanding of the world. "Hello," he said quietly. The word was a statement, not a greeting. It was the greeting of someone to whom this kind of violation, of space, of privacy, of assumptions, was not familiar. It was the sound of someone encountering injustice for the first time and not believing it. Madison's mouth opened. Her mind raced through lies, explanations, plausible stories, but something in his eyes, something ancient and dark, told her that lying would only make this worse. "I'm sorry," she whispered instead. And then she ran. She bolted past him toward the side stairs, her wet feet slapping against the marble. She heard him shout something behind her, her name, she thought, though she hadn't told him her name. And then she was down the stairs, across the lower deck and through the side gate. The landscaping was dense and overgrown, ornamental grasses and native shrubs designed to look natural but costing a fortune in maintenance. Madison crashed through it, not caring about the scratches on her legs and arms. She could hear him behind her, no longer running but walking with the measured pace of someone who didn't need to chase anyone. He didn't need to chase her. He had cameras. He had her image. He had her presence in his home, on his property, in his pool. She had 30 seconds, maybe 60, before he called the police. Madison burst through the property boundary, an invisible line marked only by the expensive landscaping, and ran down the hillside. The trail was steep and loose with scree. She half slid, half ran down to the next level of expensive homes, the next tier of this vertical hierarchy. At her car, she didn't bother drying off. She threw her bag and towel in the back seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb with the casual pace of someone who had every right to be there. Not fleeing, just leaving. In her rearview mirror, she could see nothing but the tree-lined street behind her. Her heart was a hammer against her ribs. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. She'd been caught, actually caught. Not in theory, not in worst-case scenario nightmares, but actually caught in the act of stealing his comfort, his peace, his invisible assumption that the world was his to move through safely. The police could be coming. The police could be finding her address from her car registration, her apartment, her life. Everything was about to collapse in a very specific and final way. Madison drove, heading toward the highway, putting distance between herself and that house. She couldn't think clearly. She could only feel the weight of what she'd done, the audacity of it, the transgression. And underneath that, a terrible, treacherous feeling that surprised her with its intensity. She drove for 3 hours, staying off the main highways, eventually stopping at a motel near Palmdale that asked no questions and accepted cash. She paid for the room in bills she'd withdrawn from her savings account, which was to say, the $317 that constituted her entire financial cushion. In the motel room, which smelled like cigarettes and broken promises, she finally allowed herself to check her phone. No calls, no texts, no emergency alerts, no police. That seemed impossible. She refreshed her news app, scrolled through her social media, searched for any indication that a crime had been reported at the address. Nothing. The world moved forward as if she'd never existed at all. By dawn, after not sleeping and running through every possible scenario, arrest, lawsuits, prosecution, prison, Madison had reached an unexpected conclusion. He hadn't called the police. Why wouldn't he call the police? She lay on the motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and tried to construct a logical framework for this outcome. Marcus Chen was rich. Rich people called the police when their space was violated. They called lawyers. They called security companies. They didn't let trespassers walk away. Unless he was dealing with something that made involving the police complicated. Madison had done her research on Marcus Chen. She'd been thorough. She knew that his second marriage had ended because of an affair, not with him, but his wife had been having one, and he'd handled it quietly, apparently. No ugly public divorce, no tabloid drama. She knew he'd moved money around in ways that, while probably legal, seemed designed to be difficult to track. She knew he kept his social media presence minimal and his public appearances rare. What she didn't know was whether there were things he wouldn't want scrutinized. Things that would make him reluctant to invite official eyes into his home, his life, his business. She was constructing a fiction where he was complicit in something, where her violation of him was small compared to his own vulnerabilities. It was probably a delusion, but it was a comforting one. Madison got in her car and drove back toward the Malibu hills. This was stupid. This was insane. This was the kind of decision that took people from made a mistake to actually criminal. But she had to know. She drove past the house slowly, not stopping, just observing. The gates were closed. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before, serene, perfectly maintained, impervious to intrusion. There were no police cars, no obvious signs of investigation. She circled back and parked 3 blocks away, then walked back to the perimeter of his property. The landscaping had been his design, carefully engineered wilderness that looked natural but was actually completely controlled. She found the spot where she'd crashed through the day before. There was a gap in the plantings, slightly flattened grasses where her feet had struck. Madison looked at the cameras mounted on the house's exterior. She could see at least 3 of them from this angle. She'd been recorded. There was digital evidence of her presence, her face, her trespassing. That was immutable. The question was what he'd done with that evidence. She walked further around the property, staying just outside the fence line, and that's when she saw movement. Inside the pool area, someone was swimming. Madison's breath caught. For a moment she thought it was him, that he'd come back, that he was reclaiming his space from her taint. But as the figure surfaced, she realized it was a woman. The woman pulled herself out of the pool with practiced ease, and Madison recognized her from Marcus's Instagram. She was younger than Madison had expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of body that suggested either excellent genetics or the kind of expensive personal training that cost more than Madison's monthly rent. The woman toweled off and moved toward the house, and that's when Madison saw something that made her freeze. The woman used a key to open the glass doors, not entering hesitantly, not breaking in, using a key like she belonged there. Like she lived there. Madison's mind recalibrated in real time. She'd been so focused on Marcus Chen that she hadn't considered he might not be alone, that he might have someone else in his life, someone who wasn't on his Instagram, someone whose presence he kept private. The woman was beautiful in a specific way, the way of someone who had been shaped by significant resources. Her clothes, visible in the distance, were designer. Her movements were confident. Madison watched until the woman disappeared inside the house. Then she turned and walked back to her car, her mind spinning through new, more complicated scenarios. She was sitting in her car 2 hours later, still parked 3 blocks away when the police came. A single patrol car moving slowly, deliberately, the way police moved when they were looking for something specific. It stopped at the corner, not at Marcus's house, but at the street sign. Madison's heart froze. Then the officer got out of the car, pointed to something, said something into his radio, and slowly the car moved on, not toward her car, not investigating the parked Honda Civic with the expired registration, just passing through. She realized she was holding her breath. By evening, Madison couldn't stay away anymore. She drove back to the house and, using the security code she'd memorized, opened the gates. This was completely insane. This was the moment where someone made the transition from opportunistic trespasser to someone with genuine pathology. She understood this intellectually. She also understood that she was doing it anyway. The gates swung open. She drove through and parked in his driveway, not hiding the car, not pretending she wasn't there. She was going to walk right up to the front door. She didn't know what she was going to say. When the door opened, it was the woman from the pool. She looked at Madison, at the dripping wet girl from yesterday, now dry and nervous and clearly unhinged, with an expression of pure incomprehension. "Who are you?" the woman asked. Madison started, then stopped. There was no lie that made sense. There was no explanation that wasn't incriminating. "I need to talk to Marcus." "Marcus isn't here," the woman said, and her voice had shifted. It had become colder, more assessing. "Who are you?" "My name is Madison Hayes," Madison heard herself say. "I was here yesterday in the pool." The woman's face didn't change, which was somehow worse than if it had. She simply looked at Madison like she was a species she'd never encountered before. "Come inside," she said finally. Madison followed her into the house, which still looked exactly as it had when she'd been alone there. The woman led her to the living room, the space with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the furniture that probably cost more than Madison's apartment. "My name is Veronica," the woman said, sitting on the modern sectional that looked uncomfortable but cost $80,000. "I'm Marcus's fiancée. He told me about you. He also told me to call the police, but I told him that maybe I should talk to you first, so let's talk." Madison felt something collapse inside her chest. The fiancé hadn't existed in her research. There had been no engagement announcement, no Instagram post, nothing. This woman was invisible to the public world, which meant she was important enough to protect from it. "He told you about me," Madison repeated. "He told me a beautiful, desperate girl broke into his house and swam in his pool," Veronica said calmly. "He also told me that the expression on your face when you saw him was the most devastated look he'd ever seen on another human being. He said it made him feel something. He said it made him question some things." Veronica crossed her legs. She was wearing yoga clothes that probably cost what Madison paid in a month of rent. "He's a good man," Veronica continued. "But he's also a complicated man, and he spent the last 24 hours trying to figure out who you are and why you did what you did. So why don't you tell me? Why my house isn't police matter?" Madison sat down without being invited to. Her legs had simply given out. "I needed to know what it felt like," Madison said quietly. "To be you, to live like this, to have this." Veronica was quiet for a long moment. "What's your situation?" she asked finally. And I want the real answer, not the beautiful version you're making up in your head right now. So Madison told her. She told her about her mother in the care facility, about her sister who'd cut her off, about the apartments where she could hear her neighbor's misery through the walls, about the constant mathematical calculations, rent or medication, food or transportation, present survival or future stability. She told her about how she'd found Marcus's security code, and told her how she'd been coming to the house every few weeks, just to exist in a space where money wasn't a question mark at the end of every sentence. Veronica listened without interrupting. When Madison finished, Veronica got up and walked to the kitchen. She poured 2 glasses of expensive-looking wine and handed one to Madison. "Drink this," she said. "Then we're going to call Marcus, and you're going to tell him exactly what you told me, and then we're going to talk about what happens next." "I'm going to go to prison," Madison said. "Maybe," Veronica said. "Or maybe Marcus is going to ask himself some difficult questions about what he owes to the world, and what it means that someone would commit a felony just to touch his life for a few hours." She paused. "But first, you're going to take a shower. You look like you haven't slept in 36 hours, and you're making this house smell like desperation. That's going to make Marcus uncomfortable, and we want him to be in a generous mood." Marcus arrived 2 hours later, and the moment he walked through the door, everything shifted. He was taller than Madison had expected, though she'd seen photographs. Photographs flattened people. In person, he seemed to take up space in a way that went beyond mere physical dimensions. He had a presence that made you acutely aware of your own smallness. He looked at Madison, who had showered in Veronica's guest bathroom, using Veronica's expensive shampoo, wearing clothes Veronica had provided, and his expression was unreadable. "You came back," he said to her, not as a question. "Veronica told me you asked her to call the police," Madison said. "I did." He sat down across from her, not on the sectional, but in a single chair that positioned him slightly above her eye line. Intentional, probably. "I spent all night trying to figure out why I didn't just call them myself." He gestured to Veronica, who remained standing by the window, the visible landscape her backdrop. "Veronica thinks I'm having some kind of moral awakening," Marcus continued. "That seeing your desperation made me question the entire infrastructure of my life. She thinks I'm about to surprise you with some grand gesture of charity, that this is going to be a redemption arc." He leaned forward. "I want to be clear, that's not what this is." Madison felt her stomach drop. Here it came. This was the moment where kindness became cruelty, where it turned out that letting her shower had just been a way to make her more complicit, more trusting, more devastated when the actual violence came. "What I find interesting," Marcus said, "is not your desperation. What I find interesting is your audacity. You knew who I was. You researched me. You understood exactly what you were stealing, not an object, but the idea of a life. And you decided it was worth the risk." He stood up and walked to the windows. The view was almost impossible. The entire valley stretched out beneath the house, lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set. On the left, visible in the distance, was the mansion he was standing in. "I spent the first 30 years of my life wanting to be here," he said. "Right here in this house with this view, with the kind of life that requires zero financial calculations. I sacrificed everything, relationships, ethics, anything that slowed me down to get here." He turned back to look at her. "And you know what I realized, lying awake last night thinking about your desperation? I realized that being here is almost exactly the same as being anywhere else. The view is beautiful, but you get used to it in 3 weeks. The comfort is excellent, but comfort is boring if it's guaranteed. The money doesn't make you happy. It just makes you very, very comfortable in your unhappiness." Madison wasn't sure what response he was looking for. "My question for you," Marcus continued, "is simple. What would you do if I gave you a way out?" "Out of what?" Madison whispered. "Out of being a criminal," Marcus said. "Out of needing to break into other people's homes. Out of the mathematics you were describing. I want to know, and be very careful with your answer, because I'm about to make you an offer that you'll be tempted to lie about your response to. What would you actually do if the constraints were gone?" Veronica made a small sound, something between a laugh and disapproval. "He's testing you," she said to Madison. "He always does this. He's about to make some kind of offer, and he wants to know if you're worth the risk first." "I'm not making an offer," Marcus said. "I'm asking a question. What would you do?" Madison thought about this. She thought about every fantasy she'd constructed since she was 16 years old. Finishing college, having a career, moving somewhere with walls that didn't transmit every sound from next door. She thought about the care facility where her mother lived, the way her mother's eyes had looked when Madison had explained, with maximum gentleness, that they couldn't afford the private room upgrade. "I'd go back to school," Madison said finally. "I'd finish my degree. I'd build something real, not just survive on the margins. I'd get my mother better care. I'd try to have a life that didn't require me to break laws just to remember what comfort felt like." Marcus studied her. "That's a good answer," he said. "That's not what I expected, but it's a good answer." He walked back to where she was sitting. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to tell me everything, everything you know about me, everything you've done every time you've been in this house. You're going to be completely honest. And then, depending on what you tell me, I'm either going to call the police or I'm going to help you." "Why would you help me?" Madison asked. "Because," Marcus said, "I want to know if you're the kind of person who uses help as a launching pad or the kind of person who uses it as an excuse. Because I've been rich long enough to see which kind is which. And because Veronica clearly thinks you're worth the effort, and Veronica is usually right about people." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, tell me everything." It took 3 hours. Madison told him about her childhood, about her mother's illness, about her father who'd abandoned them when she was 9. She told him about the loans she couldn't pay back, the career she'd started and couldn't afford to finish, the slow compression of her life into something smaller and smaller. She told him about finding his security code, about the fantasy she'd constructed where she would live 2 parallel lives. Her real one, barely surviving, and this one existing in his space and his comfort, in the architecture of his privilege. Marcus listened without interrupting. Veronica brought coffee, then wine, then food that she'd somehow prepared during the conversation. When Madison finished, there was a long silence. "Do you know what you cost me?" Marcus asked. "By breaking in, I mean, do you understand?" Madison shook her head. "Nothing," he said. "You literally cost me nothing. You didn't steal anything. You didn't damage anything. The only thing you violated was my assumption that my space was secure. That's actually valuable information. It's made me question my security. It's made me question what I'm protecting and from whom and why." He stood up. "Here's my offer. Listen carefully because I'm only going to make it once and your answer is going to determine the next 5 years of your life. I'm going to pay for you to go back to school. Full tuition, housing, books, whatever you need. You'll get your degree. You'll develop actual skills, and then you'll be able to build the life you actually want, not the life you're borrowing." Madison couldn't breathe. "There are conditions," Marcus continued. "First, you're going to sign a formal agreement that you'll never set foot on this property again without explicit permission. Second, you're going to get therapy. I don't say that as an insult. I say it because what you did, breaking into someone's home as a form of escapism, that's not normal coping, and you need to understand why you went to such an extreme. Third, you're going to work part-time for one of my companies while you're in school, not for payment, but as a way to understand how my world actually works versus how you fantasized about it. And fourth," he paused, "you're never going to tell anyone about this conversation, this arrangement, any of it. Not friends, not therapists, not the internet. This stays between us and Veronica. If it gets out, the deal ends immediately and I will call the police." "Why are you doing this?" Madison asked. "Because," Marcus said, "I spent 20 years becoming so focused on accumulation that I forgot to ask myself why. Veronica reminded me that being this lucky comes with an obligation. Not to feel guilty, not to prove something, but to actually use the resources in a way that means something. You're going to be my test case. If this works, if you genuinely transform your life and build something sustainable, then maybe I'll expand the program. If it doesn't, if you turn into someone who just takes and takes without growth, then I'll remember that charity is sometimes wasted." He extended his hand to her. Madison took it. His grip was firm, his hand warm, his expression unreadable. "So," Veronica said from across the room, "I guess you're going to be part of our lives for a while." And Madison realized in that moment that her break-in had worked. It had just worked in a completely different way than she'd imagined. She'd gotten into his house, his head, his conscience. She'd made him question things. She'd cracked something open in his carefully constructed world. The price was that she had to actually become someone worthy of the gift, instead of someone hiding in the fantasy of it. Madison started at UCLA in the fall, having convinced the admissions department that her gap years were due to family illness, true, and that she was ready to commit to her degree program, hopefully true. The university offered her financial aid, but Marcus had arranged for additional scholarships through one of his charitable foundations. On paper, he had nothing to do with her education. In reality, Madison understood that she existed in a thin bubble of his protection. She moved into a small apartment in Westwood that Marcus had technically purchased years ago but never occupied. He called it available space. Madison knew what it was, a golden cage, comfortable enough that she wouldn't need to steal comfort from him again. The work-study arrangement began in September. Marcus owned 3 companies, a venture capital firm, an AI development startup, and a cryptocurrency exchange. Madison was assigned to work at the startup 20 hours a week as an administrative assistant. On her first day, the CEO, a woman named Sarah who was approximately 30 and intimidatingly brilliant, looked at the file with Madison's assignment and raised her eyebrows. "You're Marcus's current project," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what that means," Madison replied. "It means you did something, and he's decided you're worth investing in," Sarah said. "He only does this every few years. The last time was with a kid who'd been incarcerated for computer fraud. Marcus gave him a job, paid for his education, and the guy is now making more money than most people will see in their lifetime. You might want to think about what you did to earn that kind of attention." Madison started helping with administrative tasks, organizing files, scheduling meetings, managing calendars. But Sarah, possibly because she was curious, possibly because she was kind, started teaching her things. She explained how venture capital worked, how due diligence was conducted, why certain companies succeeded and others failed. Madison had thought that rich people were simply born understanding money. She was learning that it was actually a language, and like any language, it could be learned. 3 times a week, she attended therapy. Her therapist, Dr. Patricia Chen, coincidentally was a woman in her 60s who seemed completely unimpressed by Madison's story. After their first session, where Madison had given her sanitized version of events, Dr. Chen had looked at her directly and said, "He told me everything. I'm his therapist too. Or rather, I've been trying to be his therapist for the last 5 years. So let's not do the polite version, let's do the honest one." The honest version was harder. "You broke into someone's home because you wanted to steal their life," Dr. Chen said in their second session. "Not their possessions, their life. That's a very specific kind of crime. It speaks to something beyond simple desperation." "What does it speak to?" Madison asked. "Disconnection from your own existence," Dr. Chen said. "Your life was too small, too painful, too constrained. Instead of building a life that was yours, you tried to rent one that belonged to someone else. That's a common impulse in people who have experienced significant poverty. The poverty convinces them that nothing they could create would be worth having." Madison thought about this in the weeks that followed. She thought about it when she went to class. She thought about it when she was at the startup, learning to code the basic architecture of AI systems. She thought about it when she called her mother at the care facility and heard the exhaustion in her mother's voice. Because her mother had accepted the upgrades to her care easily, too easily. When Madison had explained that she'd found a way to pay for it, her mother had just cried. Madison was building a different life than the one she'd tried to steal, but it was still happening in the shadow of Marcus's generosity. In November, 3 months into the arrangement, Veronica asked her to come to their house for dinner. Madison's hands shook for an hour before she drove there. The house looked exactly the same. The pool was closed for the season, covered with a clean tarp. Inside, Veronica had prepared a meal that involved duck and several sauces that Madison couldn't identify. "How is school?" Veronica asked as they ate. "Good," Madison said. "Classes are hard but interesting. My professor in my algorithms class seems to think I have potential, which is shocking because I don't, but I'm choosing to be optimistic." "That's growth," Veronica said. 3 months ago, you would have said you didn't have potential and believed it completely." Veronica pushed food around on her plate, not eating, just moving it. "Marcus is having second thoughts about the arrangement," she said finally. Madison felt her chest contract. "He feels like he's enabling something," Veronica continued. He's worried that by paying for everything, he's letting you avoid the actual difficulty of building a life. He thinks maybe he's creating dependency instead of liberation. He's right, Madison said quietly. Some days I think about how much he's spending, and I don't believe I deserve it. And some days I feel like I'm a different person now, like I'm actually building something instead of stealing it. I don't know which one is true. Both are true, Veronica said. That's what's real about this arrangement. You're both right. He's both helping you and potentially enabling you. You're both building something genuine and potentially creating a false version of yourself that depends on his support. These things can be true simultaneously. She took a sip of wine. So here's what we're going to do, Veronica said. You're going to keep the apartment and the stipend for school, but we're ending the work-study situation. You're going to get a real job instead, something competitive, something that pays, something you have to actually earn and keep. We're going to treat you like an employee, not a charity case. And you're going to actually understand in your bones what it feels like to provide for yourself. When Madison asked, "Now," Veronica said, "this week, I've already arranged interviews with 3 companies. You'll apply like everyone else. You'll go to the interviews like everyone else. And if you get the job, it'll be because you're qualified, not because Marcus arranged it." Madison nodded. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She understood suddenly that this was actually the gift. This was the part that mattered. It took 2 weeks, but she landed a job at a consulting firm that worked with tech startups. The salary was modest, $42,000 a year, but it was hers. She'd earned it. By December, Madison had a life that was genuinely her own. It still existed in the shadow of Marcus's initial investment, but it was developing its own weight, its own momentum. Then, right before winter break, everything changed. She got a call from Sarah at the startup. "I'm in some trouble," Sarah said. Her voice was tight. "Marcus is asking me to do something that's not quite legal, nothing major, but it's outside the bounds of what I'm comfortable with, and I'm trying to figure out what my options are." Madison's mind immediately went to a dark place. "What did he ask you to do?" Madison asked. "He's asked me to hire someone I think is probably unsuitable for the position, in exchange for $3 million in venture capital for the company," Sarah said. "The person is his daughter. I didn't know he had a daughter. But apparently he does. She's from his first marriage. They've been estranged for years, and he's trying to rebuild the relationship through employment. He's asking me to put her in a leadership position that she's not qualified for." Madison's stomach dropped. "What did you say?" Madison asked. "I said I needed to think about it," Sarah said. "But I'm telling you because you work here, because you came in through Marcus, and because I need you to understand that this job, the one you earned fairly and square, might become compromised if I do what he's asking. And I'm trying to figure out what's the right thing to do." After they hung up, Madison sat in her apartment for a long time. She thought about Marcus. She thought about what she'd learned about him over the past 3 months. She thought about the man who'd said that being rich meant questioning what you owed to the world. And she thought about whether he just answered his own question in a very specific way. He owed people things, but only if those people aligned with his personal narrative. If his daughter needed help, he would help her, nepotistically, unethically, regardless of the cost to others. The golden cage suddenly felt less comfortable. Madison picked up her phone and called Veronica. "I know what I'm about to say might make you very angry," Madison said, "but I need to tell you something about your fiancé." When she finished telling the story, there was a very long silence. "I believe you," Veronica said finally. "And I'm not angry at you, I'm angry at him, which means I need to go have a very difficult conversation." "I might have just destroyed the best help I've ever received," Madison said. "No," Veronica said. "If you destroyed this arrangement by telling the truth, then it wasn't actually built on solid ground. Real help has to be able to survive honesty. If it can't, then it's not actually help. It's transaction." The conversation between Veronica and Marcus lasted 6 hours and happened in the master bedroom, while Madison sat in the living room, listening to the muffled sounds of their voices. Veronica's rising and falling with fury, Marcus's dropping lower and lower until it was barely audible. Madison had not been asked to leave, she'd been asked to wait. When Veronica finally emerged, her face was red and her eyes were exhausted. Behind her, Marcus looked like he'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. "Sit," Veronica said to both of them, gesturing to the living room. They sat, Madison, Veronica, and Marcus, in the room where it had all started 3 months ago, arranged in a triangle of complicated obligation and broken faith. Madison told me that you want to hire your daughter based on nepotism, Veronica said to Marcus. She also told me that you were planning to manipulate Sarah into doing something she's uncomfortable with by leveraging venture capital. Marcus didn't respond. Here's what I want to happen, Veronica continued. You're going to call Sarah. You're going to tell her that you've reconsidered your request and that it was inappropriate. You're going to apologize for putting her in that position. And then you're going to think very carefully about what you just tried to do and why. I was trying to help my daughter, Marcus said quietly. You were trying to buy your way back into your daughter's life, Veronica corrected. There's a significant difference. One is about her, the other is about you. She looked at Madison. And you, Veronica said, need to understand that what just happened is important. You broke a rule of this arrangement. You told Marcus's secrets to me. You violated confidentiality in a way. Madison felt her heart sink. She'd done it. She destroyed everything by doing the right thing. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, Veronica said. You saw something wrong, and instead of protecting the person who'd helped you, you told the truth. That's actually the entire point of everything we've been trying to teach you. The point isn't that we wanted you to be grateful. The point is that we wanted you to become the kind of person who wouldn't tolerate injustice even when it was convenient to look the other way. Veronica stood up. So here's what's going to happen next. Marcus is going to call Sarah and do what I said. Then Marcus and I are going to have some very difficult conversations about our relationship and what we want from each other and whether we still work. And you, Veronica looked at Madison, are going to go finish your education, work your job, and build your life. None of that changes. Why wouldn't it change? Madison asked. Because the arrangement wasn't about Marcus doing you a favor, Veronica said. It was about both of you doing each other a favor. He provided resources. You provided honesty. You forced him to see himself through someone else's eyes. That's actually more valuable than $300,000, or it should be anyway. She walked toward the kitchen, then paused. Also, she said, you should know that Sarah already suspected something was wrong. The minute Marcus mentioned a daughter, she called me directly, asking if this was a legitimate request. I told her no. I told her to expect a call from Marcus apologizing and revering the request. So you didn't destroy anything. You just confirmed what we already knew, that Marcus was human, flawed, and occasionally willing to bend rules for people he loved. Marcus looked at Madison. I want to apologize, he said. For more than just the thing with my daughter. I want to apologize for the entirety of my life and the way I've built it and the choices I made that made you feel like you had to steal my life instead of building your own. That's on me. Thank you, Madison said. Don't thank me yet, Marcus said. I'm going to call Sarah now, and I'm probably going to lose some business deals because Sarah will tell people that I tried to manipulate her and reputation matters in this world. I'm going to have to sit with that. I'm going to have to understand why I was willing to do that and what it means about who I am. He stood up. You forced me to be honest with myself, Marcus said. I hated that 3 months ago when you were dripping wet in my driveway. I like it less now, but I'm starting to understand why it matters. 1 year later, Madison graduated with her associate degree. In 2 years, she would have her bachelor's. She worked at the consulting firm, and she was good at it. Sarah had promoted her to a junior consultant position based on merit, and there was no conversation about Marcus or gratitude or obligation. Madison had earned it. Her mother had been moved to a better facility. Not the most expensive one in Los Angeles, but a good one with actual care and dignity. The apartment that Marcus had given her was being converted to a standard lease. Madison was now paying rent, a rent that was below market value but still real, still her responsibility. She went to therapy, where Dr. Chen had given her something that looked like permission to stop blaming herself for her own poverty, and something else that looked like responsibility for building something real with the second chance. One Tuesday in June, Madison got a call from Veronica. How are you doing? Veronica asked. I'm good, Madison said. And she was. She was tired, school and work were exhausting, but she was good in the way that people are when they're building something that's actually theirs. I wanted you to know some things, Veronica said. First, Marcus and I got married, small ceremony, nothing dramatic. Second, Marcus has decided to expand the program. You know, the arrangement he made with you. He's now working with 3 other people, all people who had previous contact with his property for various reasons. He's giving them similar opportunities. Different arrangements tailored to their specific situations, but the same underlying principle. Madison felt a complicated mix of emotions about this. Relief that Marcus had understood the lesson. Fear that he might make the same mistakes with other people. Hope that maybe the system could actually work. He also wanted me to tell you that Sarah is expanding the startup significantly, Veronica continued. They just closed a major funding round and they want to offer you a promotion. Sarah specifically requested you. It comes with a significant salary increase and the possibility of equity. It's a legitimate opportunity, completely separate from Marcus's involvement. Sarah just thinks you're good at your job. Okay, Madison said. And the last thing, Veronica said, is that Marcus wants to know if you'd be willing to work with us, with him and me, on formalizing this program. He wants to create a foundation that provides opportunities like the one you received. He thinks it needs to be structured carefully with real oversight, real expectations, and real consequences. He doesn't want to create dependency. He wants to create actual change. Madison was quiet for a moment. Do you think he's genuine? Madison asked. Or is he just trying to feel good about himself? I think he's both, Veronica said. I think he wants to feel good about himself and he wants to create genuine change, and I think he's learning that those things can be the same thing if you structure it correctly. I think you forced him to understand something that most rich people never learn, that charity has to hurt a little bit, or it's not actually charity. It's just making yourself feel comfortable. I'll think about it, Madison said. After she hung up, Madison went to her small apartment and sat on her small bed in her small room. The apartment was furnished with things she'd bought herself. A nice lamp from IKEA, a desk where she did her homework, a bookshelf with the books she'd actually read. She thought about Marcus's pool. She thought about how it had felt to float in that water, suspended in someone else's life, pretending that comfort was something she could simply absorb through osmosis. She thought about how much harder it was to build her own life, one brick at a time, earning each piece. She thought about whether Marcus's new foundation would actually work, or whether it would just reproduce the same broken systems with a charitable veneer. She thought about whether she was being used, or whether she was using this moment to build something real. And then she called Veronica back. I'll do it, Madison said, but with conditions. First, I want real oversight. I want there to be accountability if the program isn't actually helping people build lives. Second, I want poor people on the board, not just rich people who have learned to feel guilty about their wealth. Third, I want the people being helped to have actual agency. Not just receiving help and jumping through hoops to prove they're worthy, but actually making decisions about what they need and what success looks like to them. Veronica laughed, a real surprised laugh. Marcus said you would say something exactly like this, Veronica said. He also said that this is exactly why he wants to work with you, because you're the only person involved who actually understands that charity without accountability is just another form of control. Tell him I said he's not off the hook for trying to manipulate Sarah, Madison said. He knows, Veronica said. He's going to spend the rest of his life knowing that. 2 years later, at her bachelor's degree graduation, Madison looked out at the audience and saw them. Marcus and Veronica, sitting in the middle section, looking proud in that complicated way that people look when they've genuinely helped someone without expecting anything in return. They'd gotten nothing from Madison except the knowledge that they'd done something real. Her success was theirs only in the sense that they'd provided the initial push. The rest had been Madison's work, Madison's struggle, Madison's refusal to accept the golden cage once she understood what it was. The Marcus Chen Foundation had now helped 47 people. Some of them had thrived. Some of them had struggled. Some of them had needed to walk away from the arrangement when they realized it wasn't what they needed. The structure had evolved based on feedback. Madison had her own apartment now, one that she paid full market rent for. She had a job that paid $65,000 a year. She had health insurance that covered her therapist. She had a car that she'd bought used, but that ran reliably. She didn't have everything. She still had to be careful about money. She still sometimes felt the phantom ache of poverty, the fear that it was coming back. But she had something that was hers, something she'd built, something real. That day after graduation, Marcus invited her to the house. Not the one in Malibu, but a smaller house in the valley that he and Veronica had bought together, on purpose, not as an accumulation, but as a choice. They had dinner together, real food, not theatrical food, and Marcus, without fanfare, told her something that she'd never expected. "I got in contact with my daughter," he said. "The one I was trying to buy my way back into a relationship with. I told her about you. I told her that I'd tried to help her the wrong way by using leverage and power instead of honesty. She said she wasn't surprised. But she also said she might be willing to have a real conversation with me if I could be honest about what I wanted from her and what I was willing to give without expecting anything back." Veronica reached over and squeezed his hand. "He's still learning," Veronica said, "but he's actually learning." Madison nodded. "Thank you," Marcus said to Madison, "for breaking into my house, for forcing me to see myself, for being honest when honesty could have destroyed everything you just gained. That kind of integrity is rare." "Thank you for not calling the police," Madison said, "for asking questions instead, for being willing to change." They looked at each other, the trespasser and the owner, the desperate and the privileged, the person who'd stolen a life and the person who'd provided the resources to build one instead. And in that moment, something shifted. The relationship transformed from transaction to actual relationship. Not gratitude-based, but equality-based. Two people who had changed each other forever. "I have a question," Madison said. "Of course," Marcus said. "When did you know you were going to help me instead of call the police?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't," he said finally. "I genuinely didn't know. I spent 24 hours in the hardest conversation I'd had in years trying to figure out who I was and what I believed. And the only thing that made sense was that you were a mirror. You showed me what I was, someone who accumulated things but never questioned why. And you showed me what I could be if I actually tried. So I helped you not because it was the right thing to do, but because helping you helped me. I became a better person because you forced me to be." "That's not very noble," Madison said. "No," Marcus agreed, "but it's true, and honestly seems more important than nobility." Later that night, Madison drove home to her small apartment in a decent neighborhood. She parked her car, climbed the stairs to the second floor, and unlocked her door. Inside, she made coffee and sat down at her desk. She had lesson plans to organize for the tutoring she'd started volunteering, teaching high school students from low-income neighborhoods the consulting skills that had changed her life. She was building something, not a stolen life, not a borrowed comfort, but something real, something that was hers. And somewhere in the Malibu hills, in a house that she would never break into again, the owner of the pool was learning, slowly and painfully, that the things that mattered weren't the things you could own. They were the things you could change about yourself, and the people you could become, once you stopped accumulating and started actually living.